Amidst rising tensions and a dramatic shift in global power, the South China Sea has emerged as the epicenter of modern geopolitical conflict. Once a secondary theater during the Cold War, East Asia now commands the world's attention as a critical hub of global commerce. With 40% of the world's GDP and 20% of its population concentrated here, the stakes have never been higher. The South China Sea, a vital artery of maritime trade and rich in resources, is the focal point of this brewing storm. China, bolstered by newfound wealth and a formidable military, is asserting its dominance, aiming to reshape the region's political landscape. In response, the United States and its allies are devising new strategies to uphold the international status quo. What secret maneuvers and strategic alliances are in play? Is a new Cold War on the horizon? Let's get down to it. Two places in the region are the most contentious: Taiwan and the South China Sea. China claims that Taiwan is a renegade province left over from the Chinese Civil War between the nationalists and the communists. To Beijing, this island's de facto independence and the support from foreign powers which has kept it out of the Communist Party's reach is the last vestige of what it considers to be the century of humiliation. This was the period of weakness between 1839 and 1949, when China found itself invaded and forced into unequal treaties at the hands of the Western powers and Japan. If China views Taiwan partially as a reminder of those times and as an object of revanchist thinking, it views the South China Sea as being crucial to its economic well-being. China uses its 9-dash line map to justify its claims in the area and also asserts that its settlers were present there since ancient times, but international scholars almost universally reject all of these ideas. The reality is that China needs the resources here. Its home waters can no longer supply the fish its wealthier population now demands. Beijing also fears the possibility that the United States Navy will close off the shipping lanes, particularly through the Strait of Malacca, which accounts for 20% of global maritime trade and 60% of Chinese trade, including 70% of its petroleum and liquefied natural gas imports. As early as 2003, China's then leader Hu Jintao described it as his country's Malacca dilemma. To secure and dominate these shipping lanes, China has fortified the area with militarized islands boasting radars, anti-air defenses, and in some cases, infrastructure for combat aircraft. China has also built the world's largest navy, supplemented by a coast guard that has become increasingly aggressive not only in international waters, but in the waters of other countries, such as the Philippines and Japan, which Beijing has raised territorial claims against. China has also used its vast fishing fleet as a maritime militia. In fact, according to some Chinese fishermen interviewed by France 24, some of the fishermen don't even fish. They are instead recruited as an occupying force to keep control of the waters claimed by China. The fishermen are paid a monthly salary and work closely with the Chinese Coast Guard to do this. These vessels have increasingly interfered with Filipino fishermen operating in the Philippines' internationally recognized exclusive economic zone. 2 collision incidents happened in October 2023 alone. But China hasn't only militarized the area. It's attempted to better integrate the South China Sea into its national economic and cultural life. It glorifies the 9-dash line map in pop culture and has mobilized its enormous population to patronize the area financially. For example, there are special cruises that go from the Chinese mainland to some of the occupied islands. They cost about $900 per person for a 4-day trip. The people going on the tours must be Chinese citizens who have passed tests of loyalty to the Communist Party. Chinese citizens can then step foot on some of the occupied islands amidst a scenic ocean view. Afterward, the tourists take part in patriotic songs and chants, including vows that these islands and waters are Chinese and that no invader will take them. The Chinese government is even paying a small number of people to live permanently on these islands in the middle of the South China Sea in order to better secure its claims over the area. Japan and the Philippines have responded to China's moves in the region by radically altering their military posture. In December 2022, Japan announced the biggest change in its defense structure since World War II. Although Japan had slowly loosened its interpretation of Article 9 of its post-war constitution, which prohibits the state from making war and even from maintaining land, sea, and air forces, the move made by the Kishida government actually gives it teeth to making this reinterpretation a fact rather than a theory. Up until now, Japan has had self-defense forces, but kept military spending to a minimum, reflecting Article 9's prohibition on making war. Over the last decade, even as former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe tried to make a more capable Japanese military, the country's defense budget rarely exceeded 1% of GDP. But then Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced that Japan would increase its defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2027. Japan would invest in offensive long-range missiles, drones, ships, and new amphibious assault capabilities, among other things. Japan has increased amphibious drills designed to simulate a scenario where the JSDF must retake Japanese islands that have fallen to an enemy. Though Japan does not name this enemy, everyone knows it's China, which has claimed the Senkaku Islands in southern Japan and whose coast guard routinely makes incursions in the waters nearby. In effect, Japan's recent changes to defense policy suggest that Article 9 of the country's constitution is, at best, a loose impediment and, at worst, meaningless. Such is the reality that comes with facing Xi Jinping's China. Meanwhile, the Philippines has renewed its long-standing security ties with the United States and expanded them dramatically during the last decade. Since 2014, the United States has established 9 new bases for the housing of American troops on Filipino soil under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. These span the length of the country and give the United States military positions from which to respond to attacks on Taiwan and to increased activity in the South China Sea. Filipino troops increasingly participate in bilateral and multilateral exercises simulating fights over Taiwan. It's now likely that both Japan and the Philippines would help the United States in its attempt to fend off an invasion of the island. Australia has also been preparing itself for war, emphasizing a new military build-up around its naval, air and missile forces at the expense of the army. In September 2021, it signed on to the AUKUS agreement alongside the United States and United Kingdom. This agreement would make it one of the few countries in the world to operate nuclear submarines. The new Australian security policy leaves no doubt that Canberra considers Beijing its likely opponent in the next confrontation involving the Australian military. Relations between the two countries have deteriorated dramatically in the past decade, particularly in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. China responded to Australia's calls for an independent international investigation into the virus's origins by slapping Australia with a series of high tariffs on many goods, like barley and wine. Although these were dropped in 2023, the relationship between the two countries remains tense. China also loudly protested the AUKUS agreement and accused Australia of being the one responsible for increasing tensions in the region. India's relations with China have also taken a nosedive in recent years, with deadly border clashes between 2020 and 2022. India is consequently in the midst of a military buildup, particularly around the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which sit just north of the Strait of Malacca. South Korea too has made significant foreign policy changes since President Yoon Suk-yeol took office. Prior to him, South Korea had frosty relations with Japan that significantly deteriorated in the late 2010s over unresolved historical issues. A few years ago, the South Koreans tried to walk a balance in the new Cold War environment, increasing trade with China while maintaining strong security ties with the United States. However, that's now begun to change. Since Yoon came to power, South Korea and Japan have renewed a military information sharing agreement. That was just the start. In August 2023, Yoon, Kishida and Biden met at Camp David. This was the first trilateral summit between the three countries. The first trilateral exercise took place 2 months later. The drills happened near the Korean peninsula with the North Korean threat in mind. In January 2024, the three countries participated in a trilateral naval exercise off South Korea's Jeju Island. Although South Korea has tried to maintain good relations with China during Yoon's administration, it has steadily confirmed that it will be a part of the US-led alliance network if a general conflict were to break out in the region. The North Korean threat may be the bedrock of the alliance between the United States and South Korea, but China is increasingly entering the security calculations between Washington and Seoul. Asian and Pacific countries are not the only ones increasing their presence in the area. The Indo-Pacific region is important enough to world security that the looming dispute over it has attracted seemingly peripheral layers that nevertheless have a major stake in the outcome. France has played a more active role in the region in recent years. It maintains several Pacific territories, such as French Polynesia. 90% of France's exclusive economic zone is, in fact, in the Indo-Pacific region. Paris has a lot to lose if China becomes the rulemaker here. In response, it's increasingly flown surveillance missions, documenting Chinese activity in the area, including China-flagged vessels dodging UN sanctions and transferring prohibited items like weapons. France has also conducted numerous military exercises, including trilateral drills with the United States and Japan on Japanese territory, and quadrilateral drills with the US, Australia, and the Philippines on Filipino soil. France's increased presence is something of a harbinger for Europe's return to this area. The United Kingdom, Germany, and even the Netherlands have sent ships here in recent years. Canada has been here too, participating in multilateral drills and monitoring activity in the area. But no country in the region is at greater risk here than the aforementioned Taiwan. China presumably does not want to fight a war in the South China Sea. It simply wants to keep its rivals out of the area claimed by the 9-Line map. On the other hand, China has routinely said it will incorporate Taiwan into the mainland's governance by force if necessary. Taiwan is home to 23 million people, almost none of whom want to be under the communist regime in Beijing. The people of Taiwan take the prospect of war seriously, the residents of Kinmen Island most of all. This island is only a few miles away from China and was routinely bombarded between 1958 and 78. The only thing that stopped a full-scale invasion was the intervention of the United States. Even today, many residents have built bunkers beneath their homes to take shelter in case war breaks out. Elsewhere, Taiwan's military is training civilians in survival against the Chinese attack with the use of weapons of mass destruction. Civilians train in full protective gear against chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. Taiwan has also extended the duration of mandatory military service from 4 months to a year. It's a sign of the times. Taiwan needs soldiers. China has practiced for war against Taiwan routinely. In 2022, 23, and 24, it simulated a blockade along with missile and airstrikes. Less dramatically, China has increased its gray zone operations in the past few years, routinely flying hundreds of aircraft into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. These operations allow China to collect intelligence and gradually exhaust Taiwan's defenders of supplies and morale. Taiwan has responded with its so-called porcupine strategy. Its object is to make any invasion as damaging as possible, while holding out for relief from the United States and any allies it brings with it. To do this, Taiwan is investing heavily in a missile force, including projectiles capable of striking deep into Chinese territory. These weapons include the Yunfeng supersonic cruise missile with an extended range of 2,000 kilometers. Taiwan also buys weapons from the United States in line with the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act. The latest round came on June 18th, when the Biden administration approved $360 million worth of arms sales, including missiles, drones, and related support equipment. Some of the weapons included 720 Switchblade drones, known as extended-range loitering munitions. The threat to Taiwan and its increased importance has forced America and its allies to rethink their traditional policies with regards to the island. In a press conference with Kishida in October 2022, Biden raised eyebrows when he seemingly dropped strategic ambiguity and said that the United States would come to the defense of Taiwan. A year earlier, some Japanese politicians took the unprecedented step of saying that if China attacks Taiwan, their country should join the United States in defending the island. Steadily, the United States has increased its military presence in the area to counter China's expansion. Since 2015, it's conducted freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, in the South China Sea, sailing close to Chinese-occupied islands. These FONOPs have led to numerous close calls between the US and Chinese navies. The close calls aren't limited to operations at sea, and China has shown equal resistance to America's allies. In 2022, a Canadian aircraft participating in a UN surveillance mission needed to change its course to avoid a collision with a Chinese fighter jet that was pursuing it. Chinese jets have flown dangerously close to French surveillance planes and even an American bomber. China's intentions are obvious: to bully other countries out of international airspace and take total control of the skies in the region. China's attempts to unilaterally change the status quo in East Asia and the broader Indo-Pacific region have led to an emerging and increasingly formal coalition of countries opposed to Beijing's plans. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue is perhaps the core of this coalition. Comprising the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, the Quad has had official meetings every year since 2017 and conducts routine multilateral exercises, most notably the Malabar exercise, which has ranged over the years from the Indian Ocean to the East China Sea and South Pacific Ocean. Officially, the Quad shies away from the idea that it's an organization to counter China's moves in the region. Its leaders have instead called it a grouping of like-minded countries. However, no one in China or the Quad's own member countries is fooled. More recently, South Korea, the Philippines, New Zealand, and Vietnam have participated in certain functions as part of a Quad Plus arrangement. China has strongly protested the Quad and calls it an Asian NATO. This is not a formal alliance, but the Quad nevertheless has increased joint cooperation among its participants in military and broader strategic affairs. If conflict came to the region, the Quad and Quad Plus members have a solid diplomatic and military foundation for cooperation. Not to be overlooked, Japan has requested that NATO open a liaison office in Tokyo. China responded by doubling down on its accusations that the United States seeks to create an Asian NATO to contain it. For the moment, no such collective security organization has emerged in the Indo-Pacific, but the framework exists for one to emerge in the near future as the threat to Taiwan grows. The next decade is likely to be the most dangerous time, as China's economic growth slows and its population ages and declines. Policymakers in Beijing may come to the conclusion that they must make the move now while they still can. There may be some reason to hope that China will not attack Taiwan. Taiwan provides a third of the semiconductors used by Chinese industry and more than 90% of the modern semiconductors. An attack on Taiwan will harm China's own supply chain. China needs the supply chain intact if it wants to entrench itself at the heart of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, as it calls for in its Made in China 2025 plan. Taiwan's government invested heavily in the chip industry, partially as a means to further discourage a Chinese attack. However, security considerations will usually win out over economic considerations in foreign policy. Taiwan's existence at the center of the first island chain puts it at the center of today's geopolitical fault lines. To become the hegemon of the region and project power onto the world stage, China must break out of the first island chain, and Taiwan is the key to doing that. Xi Jinping is also a dictator with little accountability, although the implicit contract between the regime in Beijing and the Chinese people is that the latter can expect high economic growth in return for allegiance to its authoritarian rule, and an attack on Taiwan would bring much harm to the Chinese economy. Xi has put significant population control measures in place since he came to power that would make resistance difficult. The Taiwan question is also a matter of deep national importance in China. For historical reasons, much of the Chinese public might be willing to sacrifice in order to correct this affront to their country's honor. Any severe disruption to the Indo-Pacific region would have grave consequences for the global economy. Once, the wider world hoped that China's participation in this engine of wealth would reduce the threats of disruption. A China tied into the global trade system would have too much to lose from rocking the boat, or so it was hoped. Unfortunately, these same hopes once prevailed before World War I, and they proved ruinously misguided. During his tenure, Hu Jintao repeatedly proclaimed that China would have a peaceful rise. Many leaders around the world were keen to believe him, even as China began to engage in an unprecedented military buildup. Xi Jinping's ascension to office ended all hopes that China would shake off communist rule and cooperate with the post-Cold War status quo. It's instead created another Cold War environment by trying to change that status quo unilaterally. Other countries around the region and the wider world have had no choice but to take notice. What do you think will come next in the Indo-Pacific region? Will the coalition now forming against China, and to a lesser extent North Korea and Russia, begin to take on a more concrete shape? Could a true Asian NATO be on the horizon? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out Could the US military conquer China all on its own? Or click this other video instead.